Good evening. It's almost a year since the death of Mahsa Amini, arrested by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard for allegedly not wearing the hijab properly. Last year, the movement for women, life, freedom exploded onto the streets of Iran and beyond. But in the country, it was met with breathtaking brutality. More than 500 were blinded deliberately. Thousands more were arrested. But women are still defying the morality police, despite a renewed crackdown involving mass surveillance, risking violence and incarceration. The BBC cannot operate in Iran. Many of our colleagues instead broadcast impartial news into the country from this very studio, which we share with BBC Persian. The internet, too, is restricted, and for many it's a crime to talk to Western media. But Newsnight's Emir Nader and producer Ali Hamedani talked to people inside the country to give us this virtual tour of Iran after the Women, Life, Freedom protests.
Is this Iran as you imagine it? The theocracy where women can't sing, dance, or even show more than their face and hands in public. Videos that have been shared widely online, and yet these women could be arrested for what you're seeing. No one on the street bats an eyelid. A cultural shift has taken place. It's been 10 months since the death of Mahsa Amini in police custody, arrested for improperly wearing a hijab. Her death led to the largest protests against the regime since the Islamic Revolution came to power. More than 500 protesters were killed and over 20,000 arrested. Many protesters lost their eyes after being shot directly with metal pellets and rubber bullets. The Women, Life, Freedom movement forced Iran's morality police off the streets until now. Recent videos verified by the BBC show the return of their feared vans. Male and female officers patrolling and stopping women for their headdress, suggesting the regime hasn't given up its fight.
Hijab is not a restriction by the government, it's by the country's laws and Sharia. Not following the mandatory hijab is haram by Sharia, and also it is politically haram.
Just after Persian New Year this April, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's speech heralds their renewed campaign. A raft of new measures, the return of familiar repression, but now with modern tools. A network of traffic cameras monitoring the country's streets, now purposed to catch drivers violating public morality rules, including not wearing the hijab. The Iranian authorities have boasted of sending out over 1 million of these SMS texts since the start of the new campaign. Offenders can lose their car or be arrested. A criminal record for not wearing a hijab.
My name is Shadi. I'm in my middle 30s.
We met Shadi online. She lives inside Iran and has taken part in the anti-regime protests. She refuses to wear the hijab again.
We always knew that whatever the government is always doing, if we call it a little bit of basic kind of freedom, it's something temporary. Because it's Islamic Republic, the regime hasn't changed. It's just we are in a war between people and governments.
Artists and actresses who've appeared in public in recent months without the mandatory hijab have been sentenced to unusual punishments. Afsana Bayagan, a well-known actress, was targeted for these outings. Given a 2-year sentence and ordered to visit a psychological clinic for her anti-family personality. But it's not just lone women targeted. Businesses on the high street are being shuttered if they are found to employ women not wearing the hijab. The regime supporters, including women, are emboldened again too. Passers-by harassing women they see who are failing to wear the mandatory hijab. In this clip, 2 women wait in line at a supermarket. A man enters, attacks them by pouring a tub of yogurt over their hair to cover it. We've managed to reach one of the establishment's foot soldiers in Tehran. Hamid Reza Ahmed Abadi is a member of the Revolutionary Guard's paramilitary group called Basij. It helps enforce rules like the hijab on the streets. He's become a prominent defender of the regime.
One group of these women are mentally challenged and they must be checked in mental health clinics. But others are fooled by the international media like the BBC. They are hallucinating and it won't be difficult for us to deal with them.
Are you not refusing to accept the diversity of Iranian society?
It's a very good question. The majority of our population are Muslim. Once I identified a spy filming a protest. She looked like a terrorist. I went to her and asked her to stop. She confronted me. I slapped her and grabbed her camera and squeezed the lens into her mouth.
It seems like you take pride in being violent towards women.
In our country, there is no such thing as opponents of Islamic Republic. People are born Muslim, so they need to follow the rules. If anyone wants to breach the laws, the enforcement powers will intervene and arrest them.
To some extent, it seems the regime is in denial about what the new generation wants and how much Iranian society has changed, or perhaps returned to values that were once common before the Islamic Revolution. Iran before the 1979 revolution, where women had relatively equal rights. This rare footage shows the first time women were given the right to vote in 1963. By the late 70s, several women served in Iran's parliament and local councils. Women could request divorce, fight for child custody, and the minimum age for marriage was raised from 13 to 18. They were also free to wear whatever they like. The country became a diverse centre for regional art and culture. Its liberal values were despised by the leaders who installed the Islamic Revolution. From the very beginning, women protested the loss of their rights, here opposing the hijab just days after the 1979 revolution. Since then, many Iranian women have led double lives. The regime paints the hijab as a religious duty, but even inside Iran it's possible to find some voices who challenge this.
I never try to convince anybody to wear hijab because I believe that in Quran does not imply that wearing hijab is compulsory, as Islamic Republic says. The majority of people do not accept this claim.
Would you say that the authorities' rules could actually be pushing people away from religion, away from Islam?
Extreme policies in Iran has pushed many women, many men in Iran far from religion. Uncovering hijab is a symbol for change movement.
In recent days, the regime's moral authority has been rocked by a series of leaked sex tapes, including a senior and hardline official responsible for Islamic guidance, engaged in sex with another man. He's been suspended ahead of an investigation. A difficult position to be in for a government that criminalizes homosexuality. Secret lives at the top of the regime. It's 45 years since the revolution that brought the clerics to power. In nearly a year since the public outburst of anger against a system that has suffocated women's rights. Now, the vision of a unified Iran that the regime projects has itself been revealed as an illusion. And it's not the hijab that's at stake, but rather the legitimacy of the regime itself.
That report by Emir and Ali. Well, I'm joined now by Iranian American and human rights researcher and writer Azadeh Pouzand and former UK ambassador to Iran, Sir Richard Dalton. Good evening to both of you. First of all, Azadeh Pouzand, at various times growing up in Iran, one or other or both your parents were in prison when you were a little girl. Were you aware of the difficulty of the fight that they were engaged in?
Yes, I was aware as a child because the fight that they were fighting is something that, especially as a little girl, you yourself experience in Iran. So, you know, you don't have to belong to a family of activists to really know that this is a struggle that as a woman or as minorities or as anybody who is at odds with the policies of the Islamic Republic would have to fight.
I mean, obviously you know a lot of young women, older women in Iran now who are defying the new rules of repression, this mass surveillance, the awful things that happen to people being blinded. They are prepared to face extreme violence now. I mean, are they thinking it's got to happen, that actually there could be a tipping point, or are they just so desperate to be heard?
I think the question here is, at least for me, the point is that the Islamic Republic has left no choice for especially the young generation. You see, it's a very sad place for a young person to want to risk their life for simple social, economic, political freedoms. And to me, that's just simply a summary of what the Islamic Republic has done for a 17-year-old, for a 15-year-old, to rather die but not live under these circumstances. This is a disaster.
And I wonder about the international community, because presumably when female diplomats from the UK and other countries visit Iran, they have to put on the hijab. Should they?
Well, in my opinion, no. And, this is actually a discourse that has been a matter of national discourse for many years for Iranians. There are some outside, foreigners who believe that there needs to be some dialogue, some kind of negotiations, sure, but this is a path that has been taken year after year, and we are still where we are. So at this moment, I think, there is a sort of a consensus among the younger generation of Iranians who want freedoms that the international community should not adhere to the discriminatory rules of the Islamic Republic.
Well, Sir Richard, I mean, you obviously know the country very well. You were ambassador during some very difficult times. What should the international community and what should the UK do in response to this new crackdown, this terrible repression and violence?
First, can I say that what this reimposition of the morality police tells me is three things. First, the admirable bravery of those continuing to raise the call for women, life and freedom. Secondly, the intensity of the challenge which the authorities perceive from this mass movement. And thirdly, the sense in the regime that if they show weakness towards the demonstrations and these calls for freedom, that would simply hasten their demise, or at least a very much more serious challenge than they've faced so far.
But I think what we're hearing, we're certainly hearing it from Azadem, and I understand from other women too, that actually what women and some men too want is disengagement. That actually the UK should be prepared to sacrifice its interests in Iran and not to do business with this regime.
We're doing extremely little business with Iran. Our trade in goods has collapsed, and that is because of the hostility expressed to us by Iran and by us to Iran. I mean, the language that our ministers use is more severe than I've ever known it in the last 20 years. And as the Foreign Secretary said in Parliament the other day, they condemn Iran in every single forum in which the international community considers this crisis. There's very little more which foreign governments can do. Disengagement, in the sense of pulling out embassies, would not help in the slightest. The regime knows the view we take, and pulling out embassies would simply deprive governments of essential eyes and ears in understanding the situation and taking advantage of any openings that might arise in the future. It's much easier to break relations than it is to restore them. Do you take that on board, Azadeh? What do you think?
I think the most important thing for me when I say disengagement, I believe that the Islamic Republic has understood that the Western world does not seem to be able to, or to be willing to hold this regime accountable for its atrocities. We've been seeing atrocities since 1979, 1980s, all the way till today. And they have managed to sort of go on these waves, you know, the low and high, and hoping that this time also it will be forgotten. So I think international legal pathways supported by not only Western countries, but other global South countries persuaded by Western countries is the way to go, because in this current culture of absolute lack of accountability, this will just simply repeat itself. So it's a matter of preventative measure. If we don't want more people killed and blinded in Iran, we have to find preventative ways.
So Richard, finally from you, are there preventative measures? Are there ways that actually the UK could up the ante or not? Or is there no leverage?
I think there's very little leverage. The United Kingdom, for one, sanctions 300 Iranian individuals. The Americans have imposed on Iran the most stringent set of economic sanctions ever imposed on any country. And a good deal of that is also shared by European countries and the United Kingdom. Iran is held accountable to the degree that's possible in the international system. But unfortunately, many other human rights abusers are left facing effective impunity, including many in the Middle East. And that is a function not of the lack of willingness on the part of some countries to hold them accountable, but of the weakness of international institutions for doing just that.
Wow. Thank you both very much indeed.